always to be happy. You can do whatever you like. You don't have to be ready. You just gotta trust that I don't have to be.
Hello and welcome to the new and improved Beginner Pilates series for 2023. My name's Margaret. I'm a certified Pilates instructor and I will be moving you through this series. In this first week of videos, we've been laying the foundation for your Pilates practice. We've been talking a lot about pre-Pilates exercises and going over the basics so that you can feel prepared as we start to move into our beginner classes. Today, we'll be talking about mobilizing our hips and the different ways that our hips can move. Just like every other class, when you're ready, let's come down into a seated position. We'll start with 4 deep breaths before we start to move through some exercises and you can see how your hips move. When you're ready, let's sit up tall, relax the shoulders, inhale through your nose, and then exhale out through your mouth, let it go. Inhale through your nose, and then exhale out through your mouth, let it go. Two more, inhale. And exhale, let it go. One more, inhale. And exhale, let it go. Good. When you're ready, from right here, let's take the hands so they come just behind us. If your legs are crossed, let's uncross the legs. Take your feet so they come in front of you. Wider than hips distance. The first thing we're going to talk about here when it comes to the movements of our hips is internal and external rotation at the hip. So what we'll do right here is going to show you examples of both internal and external rotation. We'll take our right knee on your inhale, bring that right knee in through center, rolling to the inside of that right foot. This is an example of internal rotation of the hip. You'll exhale as you're opening up. That's going to be external rotation of your hip. We'll do that same thing on the left side. Inhale as we internally rotate the hip towards the center of our mat. And then exhale as you externally rotate the hip and open back up for 3 more on each side. We internally rotate that right side and then externally rotate to open. We do the same thing on the left and then open for 2. And 2. One more. And one more. Good. Once your left knee comes back through center, you can kind of scoot around a little bit. Feet can come towards the front edge of your mat, hands to the backs of the legs. You'll bring yourself all the way down to the mat. It doesn't have to be perfect. Next, we're going to talk about examples of hip extension and hip flexion. So the first one that we're going to move through is a little bit of hip flexion. So your hip joint right here, right? It's a ball and socket joint. All that means is that there is like a kind of a ball at the end of your leg bone, your femur right here that connects into your pelvis and kind of like a circular thing. So it can move in circles, it can move in, it can move out, it can move up and down. So flexion and extension. Now here for an example of flexing the hip, we're laying down on our mat, we're trying to find our neutral spine to start. So kind of roll the hips back towards you, find the front points of your hips and the bottom points of your rib cage, get those things in line and then bring your arms down by your sides. We'll take this right leg and here we come into hip flexion. You're going to lift the right knee so that it comes above the hip. So we're flexing the hip right here. And then on your inhale, you can lower the right leg back down. And we'll do that 3 more times. You're going to inhale as you lift, flexing at the hip, and then exhale as you lower. For 2, inhale, lift. And then exhale, lower. 1 more, lift. Good. And then lower. Good. We'll move through that same movement on the left side. When you're ready, inhale as you lift. We're flexing at the hip. And then exhale as you lower. Good. For 3, we'll lift and flex the hip. And as you lower, your hip is coming into hip extension, but I'm going to show you a different example of that. On your inhale, you lift. We flex at the hip. And then you lower. For 1 more, we'll lift. Good. And then we'll lower. Perfect. Left foot comes down, hips again feet about hips distance apart, arms down by your sides. Now we're going to come into hip extension. So all that means is that you're opening up through the front of the hip. You're not bending at the hip. When you're ready, on your inhale, you're going to prepare, fill your body up with air. Exhale out, you're going to bring your hips so they come up into a bridge. It does not have to be a high bridge. I want you to aim for about halfway. And just feel how now there's length through the front of your leg. You're opened up at that hip joint, and there is a long line from your hip across the front of your leg to your knee. And then you'll lower back down. Okay, so as we come up into that bridge, we're bringing the hips into extension. Inhale. And then exhale, you can lower down. Let's do 2 more like that. We'll lift. And then lower. For 1 more, we'll lift. And then lower. Good. When your hips come back down, I'm going to talk you through just one more thing. Oftentimes in Pilates, we have different stances with our feet, of different positions that your feet can go in. Right now, my feet are hips distance in parallel. So they're parallel with each other. Another foot positioning could be hips distance, but in turnout with the toes out and the heels in. When you turn your toes out, you are externally rotating your hip. So that movement doesn't just come from the feet. It also opens your knees. It opens your hips. You could take a bridge from right here, and I'll just show you a quick example of that. So now with the hips in turnout, we have the hips externally rotated and coming into extension. And then we lower down. You could even take the feet a little bit wider and keep that external rotation. And then lower. And if you try those, you'll see that with your feet in different positions, you're able to feel different parts of your body and your muscles engaging. So with the feet a little bit wider and with the toes turned out, we feel a little bit more through the outside of the hip and the outer thigh. We're still getting the hip into extension, but with that added on rotation. And then we lower down. Usually we don't do bridges in internal rotation, but we can. It just feels kind of funky. So knees knock together, toes turn in, heels turn out. And then we lift up. So typically what you think of for internal and external rotation, you have toes out, heels in. Internal, you have toes in, heels out. And that rotation comes from the hips. I should have touched on that when we were up and seated, but the same applies when you're in a bridge. You can do all of those same positions. Now, the one other way that we move the hip is by doing circles or circumduction. So let's see. Let's lengthen the legs out. They can go all the way down to the mat. You're going to bend your right knee so that your hip or your knee comes right above your hip. You've got a 90-degree bend right above the hip, and we're going to circle our leg, thinking about circling from the hip. So you'll cross over towards the left. You're going to circle down and then come up and around. And then once you come to the top, you'll just reverse that circle. Opening out, and again, we're initiating that movement from the hip joint, and then come back up to the top. Let's do that one more time each direction, crossing over towards the left, and then opening up. Good, and then opening out to the right, lowering down, and crossing to the left. Good. Right leg goes all the way down. We'll do those same circles on the other side, bending into the left knee. Your knee's above your hip. You're crossing over towards the right, circling down, and this will feel a little different for all of us, and that's okay. And then we reverse that direction, opening to the left, circling down, and then crossing up and around. One more in each direction. We cross to the right, circle down, up and around, and then go to the left. Good. Your leg can lower all the way down. Let's bend the knees though. Bring your feet flat on the mat. We'll bring ourselves up. Hands can come towards the tops of the legs. You'll tuck your chin to your chest. You roll yourself all the way up. And again, doesn't have to be perfect. We're working on those as we move throughout this series. Bring yourself back to seated. You can go cross-legged. Hopefully that was helpful to see the different ways that your hips move and seeing how they will be moving throughout a Pilates class. Hopefully it's helpful to kind of break down that terminology. I try not to use too much Pilates jargon when we're moving through this beginner series, but hopefully that's helpful and it feels like it's adding on to your Pilates foundation. Remember, you're awesome. You can do anything you put your mind to, and I will see you back here tomorrow for our next class where we'll be talking a little bit how we mobilize the shoulder in Pilates.
Follow the light, you're able to be happy. You can do what